got it cheap. First thing next year. For now, the dog's going to sleep on it. There you go. Try not to poop on the box, yeah? It's not that bad. Or is it? Ooh. It could have been worse. Could have been a MecoVision. So the first question would have to be why, and the obvious answer, because it was cheap, or at least this particular unit was cheap, and it was still fairly brand new. Got it for about far less than what the asking price would have been, but regardless, here we go. It's the ATARIBOX, the Atari VCS, the crowdfunding wonder that people gave Atari $3 million to create this thing, this video computer system, gaming PC, streaming hybrid gimmick. And it is indeed a gimmick of sorts. And so for the first gimmick table of 2026, Happy New Year, I figure I would document, well, the journey of, well, unpacking the Atari VCS and setting it up and using it and seeing if it has any practical use in the modern age, whatever that actually entails. And well, it's a gimmick, and eventually saw release in 2021, and the reaction was rather underwhelming, and eventually Atari said, yeah, we're just going to re-release old 2600 stuff, and that's what they did, and they're much better off for it. But I don't know. Atari put their thing out, and Intellivision had a thing that they announced that largely became vaporware and memes and stuff, and now Atari owns the Intellivision IP, and the people who have the other thing have fuck all. So I don't know what else to tell you. But here you go, we got an Ataribox. We'll see. Yeah, so let's check this thing out and see. Let's check this out and see how bad it really is. I don't know if it's going to be bad. I don't think it is, but let's take a closer look at this thing. Let's look at the box first and foremost. We have say Atari VCS video computer system, gaming, PC, streaming, 800, black walnut bundle. 4K HDMI Wi-Fi, very important, and it's pretty hefty little thing. So yeah, this comes with the unit, the VCS, which has the wood grain panel on front. It has a classic joystick, which is wireless, and it has a modern controller, because you got to have one of those for your modern games, because good luck trying to play anything modern with this thing. It ain't happening. It's got a couple more buttons than the usual Atari 2600 stock joystick. Anyways, moving on to the side, we've got some beauty shots. Over on the other side, we've got an Atari thing, and the corner of the box is ripped. Okay, alright, so not quite. Anyways, we've got the Atari VCS Vault. We've got Tempest 2000. We've got the stock photo of the VCS. We've got computing. We've got Missile Command. We've got Centipede. We've got a classic joystick. We've got another stock photo. A game I'm unfamiliar with. Game room. Game controller and PC mode. Play. New and retro games and apps. Includes 100 plus Atari classics. That would be the Atari VCS Vault thing. That is outdated by the Atari whatever. Anyways. Stream your favorite games and videos in 4K resolution. Includes a 30-day free trial subscription to Antstream Arcade. Payments and subscription required for advanced services. Individual games depicted for illustration purposes. PC mode, additional operating systems not included. Okay, so we're jumping ahead here, but yeah, classic joystick button controller featuring LED effects and rumble, and customized unique PC mode, upgradable RAM and storage. Oh, so you could upgrade the RAM and the storage on this thing, which okay, that's actually kind of cool. Okay, what's inside? The Atari VCS 800 black walnut system power supply, standard HDMI cable. Well, we got plenty of those. Atari VCS wireless modern controller, USB plug and charge cable. Atari VCS wireless classic controller, USB charge and plug cable. So, let's go underneath. Let's go underneath. I'm trying to do this all one hand. The other hand's holding the. Okay, so we got some specs. So we got AMD Ryzen embedded, Radeon Vegas 8 gigs of RAM, 32 gigs Kingston internal drive, open M2 SDD slot for additional storage. Okay. Add unlimited external storage via USB, Wi-Fi, one high-def multimedia interface HDMI port. For USB 3.1, 2 front, 2 rear, yes, USB, okay, mouse and keyboard support. I'll probably read this shit. Okay, so it supports the mouse and keyboard, that's nice. PC mode compatible OS, Windows 10, Ubuntu, Debian, Chromium not included. Internet connection required, not required for classic gaming, required to access all features. CE recyclable, don't toss it in the bin. And a bunch of companies, official storage and storage provider Kingston, Power A, its official joystick controller partner. Compatible with most PC peripherals, customizable experience, AMD Ryzen with Radeon graphics, featuring USB 3.1 HDMI connectivity, wireless PC console hybrid, delivers unprecedented levels of flexibility and customization, transforming how we interact with our TVs, just as the original Atari 2600 did decades ago. That was breathtaking, literally. Almost out of breath reading that stuff. Okay, so I'm going to look for a knife to cut the sides, because I'd imagine, yeah, okay, so we'll be back. Okay, so I cut the side of the boxes. We're going to see what's inside. Oh. This must be the console. We'll set that aside for now. I hope that's the console. Probably the classic controller. And there's a modern controller. So we don't need this. So let's open this up. See what's actually inside. Let's try to open this up. Okay, there we go. Alright, so let's open this up. See what magic lies within. This is your This is your modern controller for the VCS. So you got your flat D-pad thing, your digital pad thing, which I'm not a fan of this kind of thing there, where I prefer like a cross pad on Nintendo or even something like on Genesis, but we'll see how that works out. Oh, and it turns on. Okay. Okay, USB Type 3. Yeah, because it's 2021, so that makes sense. So you got your triggers, your bumpers, and your buttons are, pretty much, you could almost call this like an Xbox style controller. It's almost the same thing, but yeah, it's okay. It's fine. And in here, you got quite a bit of cable actually. Okay. Quite a bit of cable here. I don't know, I don't know if you really need this much cable for this, but hey, sure, why not? You're charging the thing, you want to play something on your Atari thing, and you hook it up to the console, and you're on your couch. I think you could cover it, kind of, sort of. Did they say how much? Anyways, you could swatch. You power on your things, and you hold pair, and the box is kind of nice, though. Your little asteroids on there. That's kind of neat. And then I'm going to look up the I have to do this off. Oh, okay, there we go. Anyways, let's open her up, shall we? And there's your plastic joystick. Now this, and again, this also comes with. The other side we don't put it over. Yeah, so you got 2 charge cables. Pretty much the same deal. I'd imagine the same length. So okay, yeah, that's nice. Nice rubber feet in the bottom here. And of course you got the joystick. You got your, oops. You got the joystick, which I'm assuming is kind of analog-y, so it might be good for things. You got your button here. You got your start select, whatever the Xbox equivalent is, and then your Xbox and oh, look at that! It lights up. It kind of lights up. Oh, I got a pair with the thing there, and you got another button here. So yeah, this is for your classic games like your Atari 2600, and I think the Vault has some 7800 stuff on there too, which is an added bonus because the Atari Vault that came out for Steam and I think the flashback versions didn't have 7800 games, so that's a boon. Anyways, we'll set that aside. I might find some uses for the... probably not. Anyways. I'm using the big tripod today, which I haven't used in ages. So anyways. So let me pre-open this before I put it on camera. And then we can feast our eyes on the legend that is ye old ATARIBOX. Oh, hold on. Shit. I got this upside down. That's a load of crock. Anyways. Stop! Thank you for your Atari VCS purchase. If you have questions or problems with your purchase, please do not return it to the retail store. Well, it's not a problem because I didn't buy it from a retail store. But yeah, and you got the same thing in multiple languages. Okay, that's fantastic. And you got this thing. A limited time offer of $39.99 per year, premium subscription, no ads. Get access to thousands of retro games with global leaderboards, unique challenges, worldwide tournaments, Okay, and that's the Antstream thing. Is it still valid? Because this came out in 2021, and it's 5 years later, so I don't know. It comes with a free trial of Antstream, so I've been curious about that, and maybe I'll give that a shot. I bought a laptop last year. It came with PC Game Pass, and I figured, why not? Let's give that thing a shot too. There's the console. Let's set that aside. We could look at the other. Let's admire the box first. Shows you instructions on how to set up. You can pause it and see if you want more time to watch. I'm just going to go bang through with this. Anyways, you got your HDMI cable. Don't need that. You got your power cable. And you got your brick thing. The brick thing. And we have your discanted sugar clay thing. Do not eat. Very important. Got to keep that away from the dog. She'll eat anything. And I do mean anything. If it's something that she can nibble on, she will attempt to eat it. But she won't swallow it. Anyways. That is ATARIBOX. This $3 million people sent to Atari to build this thing. Okay, so you got your 2 USB ports down there. You have your thing there, your 2 USBs, your HDMI, your Ethernet, your barrel thing, and a power button on back because it's Atari 2600 and it's old school and all that jazz. Just for comparison's sake. The Atari 2600 Mini, which is their arguably more successful unit. Okay, see, here's the thing. This, I'm not sure if this is some semblance of varnished wood or just some kind of plastic that looks like wood, but this at the very least feels textured. So I have to think this is something resembling actual wood grain, which, if that's the case, get your thumb and shot in camera from me, for fuck's sake, dude. Amateur hour. Also, there's quite a bit of weight on this, but this is supposed to be an actual computer thing, so, well, yeah, roughly the same length. Obviously, this one's much thinner. But then again, that's a Atari 2600 Plus, which is a much smaller thing compared to the original 2600 unit, but either way, not a bad deal actually. Yeah, so let's get this in shot. Let's take it in. What have I gotten myself into? Is probably the key question. You know what? I ain't unhappy so far. I might actually get some use out of this, kinda, sort of, you know. If nothing else, it'll make for entertaining video fodder, but yeah, so I nabbed some Windows 10 media, so we'll see if about doing some Windows 10 and a PC version thing of that. But yeah, apparently you can use it as a proper PC thing if you can set it up properly, and we'll see about doing that eventually. But for now, I'm just going to power it on. We're just going to use some of the basic stuff that it came with, and go from there, I guess. You know, call it. I'm sort of winging it at this point because I really don't know how we're gonna something or other. Anyways, that was the unboxing. Now I just gotta plug it in and see how this. I hurt my shoulder. I'll be right back. Okay, so I got the unit plugged in and set up to my capture station there. I got the modern controller plugged in because that's probably what I'm going to use, and I also have a keyboard that I had laying around. So I'm going to start. And indeed, little Atari, little Fuji. Yeah. We'll switch to the yeah, we've got to do some stuff here. Yeah, we'll switch to the live feed and stuff. Anyways, switching to the direct footage. So I bet there's about 90 minutes of footage that I had thought I had been recording, but turns out that's not the case, and we recorded nothing. So you missed out on the initial setup where this thing was installing updates for about half an hour before we eventually got to the main setup of creating an account and picking your network and things of that nature. A couple other things that you had to do before you eventually got to play the stuff. So what you were looking at was actually the second run through of the console, which wasn't much. It was basically, you know, seeing what's there, and that's about it really, and playing a bit of the Atari Vault, which was just the Atari Vault that you would have gotten on Steam, except without the extra games and such. But yeah, one thing I noticed is that this thing is very loud at times, like the fan would go up and down, and this, you know, feeling this a bit here, it does get a little warm, you know, quite warm. So I don't know, a couple of little warning signs there compared to the mini PC that I have there, which can sometimes get a little loud at times, but it never really felt warm. So that's a bit concerning. But other than that, I don't know. We did some basic stuff on there. So now we're going to experiment with some other stuff.
Right off the bat, the general setup for ATARIBOX for the first time in. Pretty straightforward for anyone who has gone through the process of setting up a new console or PC. Link it to a network, wait for the updates, create an account, that sort of thing. You can do a wireless setup without much issue for your internet, but I opted for good old-fashioned wired Ethernet for the purposes of this video and beyond, because that tends to hold up a little better than the wireless, at least around my neck of the woods. This, of course, varies from person to person, and I'm not going to tell you which is better. That depends entirely on you, should you want to purchase this fine piece of machinery. So what are you getting right out of the box? Well, you have the Atari VCS Vault, which is a collection of 100 Atari games from the arcades and the original VCS, aka the Atari 2600. Now, this setup looks vaguely familiar. It's a repackage of the old Atari Vault compilation that graced Steam for a short while before it got delisted to make way for Atari 50, the current anniversary collection, which you can purchase through the VCS shop, but only the base package and none of the DLC, which is kind of a bummer, but anyways. So yeah, you're getting 100 vintage Atari 2600 and arcade titles, a nice selection of games, but also a great majority of which have seen re-release after re-release after re-release after re-release for who knows how long on who knows how many formats. So yeah, on the one hand, it's nice that you're getting these for free, included with the package, but you could play these pretty much anywhere and everywhere these days, so it's not really all that special. And there's a volume 2 for about $5 that includes about 50 additional games, including some Atari 5200 games, which hadn't seen as much circulation as the 2600 or arcade stuff, so that's nice to have. And also, if nothing else, you'll have an analog controller that actually works the way it's supposed to be able to play these things properly, so that's something at least. Also included is an app for the Antstream streaming service, which requires a paid subscription to take advantage of. But once you have that, you'll be able to access, at last count, a little over 1,600 games, vintage arcade titles, home computer, and console games. Antstream's a British company, so there's more of those vintage Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum, and Atari 8-bit things. But there's also a considerable selection of arcade titles, Atari 2600, 7800, NES, SNES, Mega Drive, and a couple others as well. A good number of these being well-known titles you might actually be familiar with, others not so much, a rather modest selection of homebrew titles to sample as well, and of course a very considerable percentage of Euro jank titles that people somehow thought were genuinely good games. It's a streaming service, of course, so typically you need an active internet connection to be able to take advantage of this thing, which shouldn't be too much of an issue these days unless you don't have an active internet connection, in which case you're probably not watching this anyway. But because it's a streaming service, there's a tendency for the signal to get hiccuped in some, or lack of a better term, resulting in some occasional garbled images or delayed controller inputs. Some games even have sound output lag where the sound would be a second or so behind what's going on screen. Little defects like that pop up every so often, and whenever the stream is a little problematic, you usually have a red signal to let you know that things are not on the up and up. But when the stars align and everything works as it should, which in my case is more often than not, I've only had a couple games that I've played that really struggled with the streaming, but for the most part, it actually works really well. I played this on ATARIBOX, of course, because that's where I started it, but then I also sampled the PC app, which also works fairly good. And for shits and giggles, I also gave Antstream a try on my mobile phone and will never do so again. Fucking hideous. Antstream on ATARIBOX has a dedicated Atari section so you can play all the Atari stuff in one page, which is nice. What's not so nice, however, is that when you're loading up a game and it's showing the controls for the said game, it's showing an Xbox controller on ATARIBOX, which has its own modern controller. So, yeah, good job, guys. But yeah, might as well dive into the controllers, which the package I got came with two distinct controllers, a modern controller and a classic controller. The modern controller looks like your standard stock Xbox controller in terms of form factor, button layout, and all that jazz. Honestly, there's not much of a difference between the two other than the logos and some LED placements. Although I do like how the left analog stick and the right trigger are colored red, in sort of like a thematic thing. That's actually kind of cute. The modern controller does what it does well enough. It's nice and weighty, comfortable in the hands. It actually took a fall one time and it still works. Nothing rattling on the inside or anything like that, which pleases me because I can't imagine getting another one of these things being all that easy to do these days, all things considered. The analog sticks work fine. If you've held any other Xbox-like controller, this is pretty much old hat. Buttons, bumpers, triggers feel fine. Standard fare for the time, but the D-pad is sort of a mixed bag. Instead of a Nintendo-style crosspad or the more circular pad of the Sega variety, you have this sort of weird circle thing with little bumps on the cardinal directions. I'm guessing they made this to let the finger sort of slip and slide on the pad without ever really depressing it, and yeah, that finger will slip. But it's a fairly responsive D-pad. I've played enough platformers with this thing that it holds up just fine. Not exactly a favorite of mine, but it gets the job done. It's a matter of preference, and honestly, that's the best way to sum up the modern controller. It's your stock modern controller that you got on Xbox or Nintendo Pro or whatever the case may be, with a unique D-pad that may or may not be to your liking, but it does what it does well enough, and no real complaints otherwise. On the flip side, you have the classic controller, which is a modernized take on the original Atari joystick, and it certainly looks the part. This one has the familiar layout of a joystick and a big old red button on top, but you also have a red button on the left side for 2-button games, and also your start and select buttons, or whatever they're supposed to be calling this, on the bottom, as well as your Atari home logo on the right side of the stick. Now, I do like the LED ring lighting up in the direction you're holding the stick. I thought that was a nice touch, though not every game takes advantage of that feature, unfortunately. Also, unlike its inspiration, this joystick is analog, so playing those 5200 games on that second volume of Atari Vault shouldn't be much of a problem because this analog stick actually works the way it's supposed to. But as an added feature, you can also turn the stick like a little knob on an old school paddle controller, which makes it ideal for your paddle games like Breakout and other such things. It goes without saying that the classic controller is obviously best suited for more old school, simpler games such as those found on vintage Atari hardware. I don't think you'd want to use this to play something like, I don't know, Super Star Wars or anything like that. Not that I haven't tried, and to be fair, it is kinda sort of playable to a certain extent, even though you're missing half the buttons that you need to properly play the game, but still it is doable, just not recommended or anything of the sort. Yeah, so naturally the uses for this thing is rather limited, but given that you've got a handful of vintage titles for which this would be best suited out of the box, it does offer that nice bit of old school throwback. And for what it's worth, I did have fun using this thing, which is saying something coming from someone who never cared for that original joystick. Both controllers come with micro USB charging cables, and I felt the battery life was more than adequate for both, lasting a couple days of intense play, more or less. Apparently there's a way to be able to make these things playable on other platforms like Windows or Steam, but I haven't gotten that far yet, so I'll probably have to get back to you on that in a future video. Assuming we ever get to that point, of course. In case you didn't get the memo, AtariBox is a digital-only platform, which means your only means of procuring new games is via the Atari VCS storefront, which plays host to some Atari releases such as Atari 50, the Recharge series of classic remakes, Yars Rising, Adventure of Samsara, and a couple others, some independent titles of indeterminate merit, and a modest selection of vintage Atari 2600 titles, almost all of which are accessed via Atari Vault, which you already have for free, a smaller selection of Atari 700 titles such as Ninja Golf and Planet Smashers, and even some homebrew titles conceived for both vintage consoles. And that's about it, really. In the near 5-year period that AtariBox has been out, the storefront only has a little over 220 plus games, give or take. And when you really think about it, that's a bit sad, considering how other console storefronts had amassed much more titles in that period of time. And you would think that, considering Atari owns Digital Eclipse, Night Dive, a couple others that specialize in these classic game compilations or remasters or what have you, that some of that stuff would make their way over to this weird little experiment that I'm sure the current management of Atari would rather pretend doesn't exist, to at least sate those poor few souls who bought this thing in assurance that they haven't wasted their hard-earned dollars. But alas, 'tis not to be, and what you have available for purchase... Look, I bought a couple 700 ROMs. And a couple of homebrews that I probably wouldn't have been able to play because Atari H carts cost an arm and a leg with conversion rates, shipping, and duties to be paid over the border. But other than that, there isn't anything here that I just can't get on other platforms like Steam or Switch or whatever the case may be. There are no standout titles that scream killer app for AtariBox. I'm sorry, but that simply doesn't exist. They had games intended for this thing that eventually made their way to other platforms. So here we are, Tempest 4000 for the brand spanking new AtariBox system. Oh boy, great to see this exclusive AtariBox game on Steam. And it's also available for PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. So why in the blue hell would I want to get an AtariBox now? And so what's left? And what can I get here that I can't get anywhere else, aside from a few old ROMs that can't be attained elsewhere, if you know what I'm saying. And since we're touching on it, let's talk about the emulation. The ROMs aren't even using custom emulator software designed for the platform. 2600 ROMs use Stella, 7800 ROMs use MAME. You could press the home button during 700 games to bring up the MAME menu and do your configurations there. But Stella apparently requires a keyboard to access its options, which is just tremendous convenient stuff. And for what it's worth, the emulation on these things are pretty solid. I'm not going to complain about that aspect, but stuff like difficulty switches, game select buttons, and accessing emulator options should be done off the controller, not requiring another peripheral to access these things. That's like Nintendo letting you buy ROMs of its classic games on Switch, but instead of using Virtual Console, you're using third-party stuff like Nesticle, SNES 9X, or Kgen. That's just sloppy.
Okay, it just occurred to me I should probably do a couple last shots before we call the video, but here's the back end. Powering the system. And yes, it's a very loud machine. When it's working hard, it's very loud. But it doesn't make, like, that's the fan. It doesn't make a whole lot of noise, but it's still anyways. Got some extra shots I gotta do, and then
So the other major feature of ATARIBOX, and probably the one thing that most people who have an interest in this thing will gravitate towards, is the PC mode, which allows you to install another operating system like Windows or Linux or what have you onto another hard drive and basically turn this into a little mini underpowered PC thing. Now if you choose the PC mode option from the dashboard, the system will prompt you once if you want to do this, and then there's about 2-3 minutes of stalling before the system reboots back to the startup, which, if you don't do anything, just restarts ATARIBOX and it's business as usual. So PC mode requires a bit of work to take advantage of, and this is where the real adventure comes into play, and in the minds of many where the platform's true value lies. And unfortunately, like I said, tapping into that value requires actually a lot of work. And if you're not comfortable messing around with the inner workings of hardware or things of that nature or opening things up, then this is the point where you get off this ride, take a nice long walk, and never look back, because everything we've explored up to this point is what you get out of the box with little to no tinkering of the actual hardware, and we've established that there isn't much to work with, clearly. So I'm going to try and explain or document my process here, which I would not consider a guide to anything. If you want detailed instructions on how to modify things and how to do things properly, there are other people that could do a far better job of explaining things than I ever could. Even when I was going through the process of making modifications that needed to be made, I was mostly operating on hope that everything works out fine and I haven't ruined anything at the end of it all, which is always a feeling I have whenever I open these PC boxes up. So bear with me as I describe my experience, which will vary from person to person. So you're going to need a keyboard to access the BIOS when the system powers up to configure the secure boot settings, so you could select the hard drive to boot from. Also, a mouse would be nice depending on the OS you decide to utilize at the other side of this journey. Now, when it came to the process of prepping some hard drives, I've discovered that none of my external drives were compatible with this thing. I don't know if it's the wiring, the formatting, or whatever the case may be. I tried doing solid states, I tried flash drives. If it's external, it won't load unless it's an installer. Atari's OS will see the drive, but that's about it. So that's when I decided I might actually need to open this thing up and look into what I would need to boost the capabilities of this baby. ATARIBOX requires specific components as specified in the ATARIBOX upgrade manual that you could find online. Notably, you'll need a SATA format M.2 solid-state drive. There's another variant that's incompatible with ATARIBOX, and there's also a specific kind of RAM that ATARIBOX accepts that you could upgrade up to 32 gigs of RAM. Now, the process of tearing things apart, making the necessary component upgrades, and putting it back together was a bit of a pain in the ass, took a little longer than I would have liked, and I've done tinkering with PC upgrades in terms of RAMs and hard disks that went by smoothly compared to this. This seemed a little less convenient than I would have liked, which I guess makes sense since you don't typically want people to tinker with your hardware, but if you designed this thing with tinkering in mind, I don't know. Anyway, your mileage may vary in this regard, and I won't harp on this too long because I eventually got the job done. I installed an SSD drive as well as added a bit more RAM, not a whole lot more, but enough that I could run some basic Steam shit and such. So after doing a bit of a basic search, I eventually just went with the Chimera OS, which lets you play games off Steam, and I guess it does a little more than that because I was able to install the RetroArch emulator software, which I haven't used all that often, but I guess works okay. For what it does, which is run Steam games, it runs fine. I picked out a few games that were compatible with Steam OS, as well as what I figured it could run on some modded specs. Some titles worked, others not so much, and then there's a couple experiments that I decided to try out, and that's another story for another time. So like I said, this is a bit of a process. Chimera is fine for Steam, and the Steam stuff works fine, whatever I could run on it at least. But I would have liked to run some other stuff on there that isn't just Steam. Maybe try and get a Windows running on there so I could at least run some stuff off GOG, or maybe some other stuff that don't fall within Steam or whatever the case may be. But I don't know. Maybe someday we'll come back to this and see how deep a dive we could make into this one. But for now, PC mode is untapped potential that continues to be untapped. And I'm probably just going to use this as a glorified AntStream box and maybe a handful of Atari games that uses the classic controller's paddle thing, which AntStream doesn't really take advantage of. Which makes me kind of sad, but eh. So I spent a few months on and off with ATARIBOX, and for what it's worth, I find myself spending a few more months with ATARIBOX down the road before I could really gauge it for what it's worth. I picked up a unit back in October. I'm recording closing thoughts at the tail end of March. This video is going to be up in April, presumably. And who knows, maybe we'll do a 1 year later sort of deal and see if my feelings on the platform has changed. But I want you folks watching this to understand that this is not intended to be a product overview or hardware review or deep dive analysis or anything of the sort. This is just some bloke messing around with a piece of machinery and sharing some thoughts on the experience. If you're looking for me to tell you whether this is going to be worth your time and money, I'm not really sure that I can because, first off, it's clear Atari would rather forget this exists, which is why you can't order this thing outside the US, so secondary market it is. I could tell you that there are better, easier means of playing Atari today. This adds nothing to the experience otherwise. But also, this is the sort of thing that might appeal to a certain subsection of the gaming or computing audience, and I'm not even sure what that actually entails. I could probably guess, but I really don't want to. So I could only go by my own experience with this thing, and if you could get something of worth out of this whole deal, whatever that might be, then great, wonderful. And if this felt like a complete waste of an hour, then I can only offer my condolences and move on. At this very moment, and my perspective could change in like a few months when I've tinkered with this thing long enough, but this is my only real takeaway from something that could be laughably called a critical perspective. The ATARIBOX, the Atari VCS, whatever you want to call the thing, was something that was conceived by the previous iteration of the current Atari with some fanfare, released, and then quickly abandoned with a change in regime. The fact that the storefront is still active and I'm able to purchase stuff on there is nothing short of a miracle. But otherwise, this is a machine that out of the box is just an overpriced AntStream device with some Atari games tossed in for good measure. And the stuff that's on the storefront is stuff that more than likely you can get elsewhere, either on other platforms or via sites like Atari Age if you prefer your homebrew on actual cartridges. Atari games can be played anywhere and everywhere. There are easier ways to get these things. Doing so here, yeah, that classic controller is kind of sweet, but limited in what you could actually do with it. And a modern controller, been there, done that. Have fun with the D-pad if you can, but otherwise, nothing you haven't seen before. Ultimately, the only way to really get mileage out of ATARIBOX is through external means. The PC mode available that you could run a secondary OS from another hard drive, assuming you have one installed, and even then there's a lot of tinkering and figuring out what works and what doesn't before you get to a point where it really doesn't feel like it's worth the effort. Again, I can only speak through my own experiences. Others have had better luck getting this aspect of the box off the ground. What it ultimately boils down to is how much effort you're willing to put into this thing in order to get the most out of it. If you want a fancy computer thing and are willing to put in the work to get it up to specs, it's a nice looking piece of tech if nothing else. The wood grain's kind of nice. It's actual wood grain and not a plastic pretend thing. But again, if all you want is a plug-and-play gimmick, there are plenty of cheaper, more affordable, and more accessible options available to you that are much more convenient. Ultimately, the real killer for this thing boils down to a lack of support. They'll drop a new game into the shop every so often, sure, but only a couple hundred games in about 5 years, and outside of the stuff you could get elsewhere, which is practically everything. none of it really stands out as must-have or anything of the sort. There is a part of me that wishes more stuff was added frequently to the storefront that would have made this more worthwhile without having to gut the thing and add another OS to the mix. But it seems like these days AtariBox is more of an afterthought, while the current management are more focused on re-releasing old cartridges, reviving old properties and compilations, and telling Night Dive to remaster as many old-school first-person shooters as they can find to give Civ 11 more aneurysms than his latest sewer count.
So with all of that having been said, and with all of that in mind, do I regret the AtariBox purchase? Not really. No. Surprisingly enough. Granted, I paid a little less than I would have, had I bought this at the regular retail price, and this was the premium package, I believe, which had a little more RAM and the 2 extra controllers and the wood grain finish. Again, actual wood, which is much appreciated. But otherwise, even with the work that and the upgrades that I had put into it, which sort of offset the discount, what I got was quite satisfactory. The most I got out of it was I got a decent Andstream box, which was probably the impetus that pushed me towards getting a subscription for that service, and I kind of liked that service for, being able to sample some games I wouldn't have otherwise. Certainly the homebrew stuff was worth exploring, so that's kind of nice, and like I said, I could get some decent video fodder out of that for the foreseeable future. The Steam side worked fine once I got that working. The RetroArch is kind of okay. More than willing to experiment with some other stuff, whenever I can. Like I said, this is sort of a side project that I had, on the thing there, and I figured why not. There was an opportunity to get it at the cheap. I got it, and like I said, we'll probably revisit this in about a year. Probably will revisit this sometime in the fall, 1 year later, sort of deal, and see if my feelings on this thing, if I've done anything else. But otherwise, I don't know. For what I don't know. If you're looking for me to tell you whether this is worth it to you, if you're looking for just Atari games to play, there are easier ways to get those, cheaper ways to get those. This need not apply, but I don't know. It's a novelty, and a novelty that's quickly forgotten about, much like the Atari Hotel. Or are they still envisioning that? Or is that even still a thing anymore? I don't know. Just stick with Atari 7800 and 2600 plus systems, and maybe, I don't know, put out a buy ColecoVision. Do a plug and play of that, and we'll be golden. All 3 hardware war things, the soft console stuff, whatever the terminology is. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little ride on the AtariBox train. Like I said, I wasn't intending this on being anything more than a documentary of my thoughts and my notes and things of that nature. And like I said, if you get anything out of this, great, wonderful. If not, my condolences. In any event, that's it. Thanks for watching. Till next time, take care, be safe, and good night.